There's a certain kind of YouTube channel that you do not watch because of the content alone. You watch it because of something harder to name, something that sits underneath the edits and the engine noise and the finished product shots. Matt Armstrong's channel has always been that kind of channel. Millions of people have subscribed, millions more have clicked through on individual videos. And if you ask most of them to explain precisely why they keep coming back, they would struggle to give you a clean answer. The cars are impressive, yes. The restorations are ambitious, and the production quality has grown considerably over the years. But none of that fully explains the loyalty the channel generates or the emotional response that certain videos produce in people who normally watch YouTube with a fairly detached attitude. The explanation, for anyone who has paid close attention over the years, has always had a name. That name is Tony. Tony Armstrong is Matt's father. He has appeared throughout the channel's history in a way that is difficult to categorize because it does not fit the usual patterns of YouTube family content. He is not a co-host. He does not perform for the camera or deliver lines or play a character. What he does is show up in the workshop and do what he spent his entire working life doing, which is looking at vehicles and understanding them the way that only comes from decades of real, hands-on mechanical experience. He leans over an engine. He notices something. He says what he thinks should happen next. And then he moves on. That quality of presence, calm and competent, and entirely uninterested in the attention that YouTube normally rewards, turned out to be exactly the thing that made enormous numbers of people feel like they were watching something genuine. For years, though, that presence also generated questions that nobody seemed willing to answer directly. The questions were not unreasonable ones. When a young creator begins producing automotive content at a level that impresses people who have spent careers working on cars, it is natural to wonder where that level of knowledge came from. When that creator has a father who is an experienced mechanic, and when that father is visibly involved in the projects being filmed, the assumptions follow naturally. People in the automotive community around the channel's home in Leicester had their own versions of how the story went. Those local conversations became online conversations as the channel grew, and online conversations have a tendency to become something considerably louder and more definitive than the original uncertainty that produced them. By the time the speculation had fully developed, two distinct camps had formed with two very different readings of the same evidence. One version said that Tony was the real technical force behind everything viewers were watching, that Matt was essentially presenting work that his father's knowledge and experience had made possible, and that the credit for the channel's reputation in the automotive space belonged to the older man standing quietly in the background. The other version pushed back entirely and argued that Matt had built his skills and his business through his own effort, that the father-son relationship was genuine but not professionally significant, and that giving Tony the credit was a way of diminishing something that Matt had actually earned. Both of those versions circulated for a long time. Both of them attracted passionate defenders. And for a long time, Tony himself said nothing publicly to correct either one. That silence recently ended. Tony Armstrong decided to address the speculation directly, and what he said does not confirm either the versions that people have been arguing about for years. It confirms something more complicated and considerably more honest. The picture he paints of Matt's early years is one that most people pushing a narrative of inherited advantage simply did not know or chose not to engage with. Before the channel existed, before the subscriber counts and the ambitious project cars and production setup that the channel operates with today, there were years of ordinary and often unglamorous work. Food delivery, bar shifts, time spent in automotive retail and in tuning shops where nobody had any particular obligation to be generous or patient with someone who was still learning. Those years did not happen in a family garage where a knowledgeable father was smoothing the path. They happened the way most people's early working years happen, which is through necessity and repetition, and slowly accumulating something that might eventually become useful. Tony's account of his own involvement during the garage years corrects a specific misunderstanding that the speculation had allowed to develop. Yes, the space was available. Yes, when a problem appeared that Matt had not encountered before, Tony would offer the kind of directional thinking that decades of experience makes possible, identifying the likely causes, pointing toward what should be checked, explaining the logic of how similar problems had presented themselves in the past. What Tony is clear about is that this is where his involvement stopped. The tools were in Matt's hands. The decisions about how to proceed were Matt's to make. when something went wrong, and in the early years things went wrong regularly. The process of figuring out what had happened and how to resolve it remained with Matt. Tony was not there to take over when the work became genuinely difficult. He was there to make sure that difficulty turned into learning, rather than simply into frustration and stalled projects. This distinction matters far more than it might initially appear to someone who has not worked in a skilled trade. There is a version of mentorship that produces people who have watched problems being solved. There is a different version that produces people who can actually solve problems themselves. The difference between those two outcomes is entirely determined by who is holding the tools when something goes wrong. A mentor who steps in and resolves complications as they arise is protecting an apprentice from a specific experience that builds real competence. A mentor who explains the thinking, offers a direction, and then steps back is doing something much harder and much more valuable. The results of those two different approaches are not immediately obvious. They take time to become apparent, but they are total in their difference, and the channel's own archive contains the clearest possible evidence of which approach Tony took. If Tony had been carrying the technical weight, while Matt served as the presenting face of someone else's expertise, the work in those early videos would have been consistently competent from the beginning. It was not. What the archive actually shows is uneven and improving, and occasionally surprising in both directions, and gradually more assured over time. That kind of development arc cannot be manufactured. It cannot be produced by having someone more experienced do the difficult parts off camera. It is a specific signature of someone genuinely learning through the work itself, making real mistakes, experiencing real consequences, and developing actual capability through the process of dealing with both. No amount of access to expertise produces that arc. Only the genuine experience of acquiring it does. By the time the channel was producing the larger and more ambitious projects, the relationship between Matt and Tony had shifted because it needed to. The early structure of a more experienced person guiding someone who was still developing had given way to something different, a genuine collaboration between two people who brought genuinely different strengths to the same work. Tony brings something to those later projects that is simply not replicable through effort or research. The kind of pattern recognition that comes from spending decades working on the specific ways cars fail, the ability to look at something unexpected in a restoration and recognize it from something encountered years earlier under completely different circumstances, that is a form of knowledge that only time can produce. It changes the direction of projects. It prevents expensive mistakes. It sometimes means a difference between a restoration that succeeds and one that does not. Matt brings something equally essential and equally hard one, knowing which moments in a complex technical process matter to an audience that is following along from outside, understanding how to explain what is happening without losing the people who are watching, making the frustrating parts of a difficult project feel like part of the story worth seeing through rather than just obstacles to be documented and overcome. That is not a natural talent. It is a craft that was developed through years of experimentation and feedback and gradual refinement based on what the audience was actually responding to. The channel that exists today is built on both of those sets of skills working together, and it genuinely could not be what it is if either one of them were absent. The moment that most clearly revealed what the relationship between these two people actually looks like came in 2025 when Matt chose to rebuild a flood-damaged Aston Martin DBX as a gift for his father. The choice of project was not arbitrary. A luxury SUV that had sustained serious water damage represented exactly the kind of undertaking that requires both genuine mechanical capability and the willingness to commit to something that might not work out. It was not a safe or easy project to take on. It was a meaningful one, and the meaning was legible to the audience that had been watching long enough to understand what they were seeing. More than 6 million views accumulated on that video, a number that says something important about the relationship between an audience and the people they choose to follow over years. People were not watching because they needed to know whether the Aston Martin could be rescued. They were watching because they had developed a genuine investment in the people working on it. That kind of investment is not something that can be engineered through production strategy or content planning. It accumulates slowly over a long period of consistent, honest documentation of real work and real relationships. The fact that the father-son dynamic at the center of the channel had always been exactly what it appeared to be is probably the most significant reason that the audience's trust in it is so durable. Tony's decision to address the speculation directly after years of silence is itself consistent with everything that has made him compelling to watch. He does not appear when appearing is not necessary. He does not speak when speaking is not going to change anything useful. The fact that he chose to respond now suggests that the accumulated misinformation had reached a point where continued silence was beginning to allow a genuinely false version of events to become the accepted one. What he confirmed is not the version that either camp of speculation was hoping for. He did not validate the narrative of a son who built everything alone and needed no one. He did not confirm a narrative of a father whose expertise was the invisible foundation of someone else's credited success. He confirmed a partnership. Two people with different abilities and different kinds of knowledge, built over many years and grounded in honest work and genuine mutual respect, producing something together that neither of them could have produced alone. That is a less simple story than either of the alternatives that had been circulating. It is also a more interesting one, and more importantly, it is a true one. The instinct to reduce creative success to a single source, a single explanation, a single person who deserves either the credit or the doubt is understandable, but it almost always misses what actually happened. What actually happened here was two people being genuinely good at different things and choosing to work together. The channel that resulted from that choice has earned the audience it has.